The Sky Above Bremen, January 11th, 1944. 25,000 feet up, the world is white fire and steel. The air is thin enough to burn your lungs. Inside a B-17 named Lucky Lady 2, 10 men breathe through rubber masks, fingers numb around cold metal. The intercom cracks. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high." In the top turret, Sergeant Hank Doyle swings the twin 50s toward a streak of black on the horizon. Focke-Wulf's diving head-on. They come in line abreast, sunlight flashing off cannon muzzles. Every man in the formation knows this attack. It's the killer move, Luftwaffe's frontal assault. You can't hit them in time, and you can't dodge. "Hold your fire! Wait for range!" the pilot yells, voice shaking. But Doyle can already see it, the cold geometry of death. The angles don't work. If he tracks that fighter now, his barrels will cross his own right wing. Regulations say that's suicide. Fuel tanks, control cables. You could cut your own plane apart. The FW-190s open up. A line of orange fire races toward them. A burst tears through the nose plexiglass. The bombardier screams, gone silent mid-syllable. Doyle doesn't think. He yanks the handles, forces the guns past the traverse stop, and fires through the wing. Tracer rounds carve two white lines across the metal skin and vanish into the sky. Then, one of the enemy fighters detonates in a sudden bright sphere of fire. For a second, nobody breathes. "Jesus Christ, he hit him!" someone yells. Another fighter peels off, trailing smoke. Doyle stares through the gun sight, his own barrels smoking, holes glowing red along the wing's edge. He just broke the biggest rule in the manual. But he's alive. And by the time this day ends, this insane moment will change everything. It hadn't started with Doyle. It started with a pattern: bodies, wreckage, and the math of death. By the winter of '43, the 8th Air Force was bleeding out over Germany. Every mission east of the Rhine was a gamble. The bombers had no escorts that could make it all the way to target and back. Every gunner knew the odds. 1 in 4 might not come home. October 14th, 1943, Schweinfurt. They called it Black Thursday. 291 B-17s left England. 60 never came back. 600 airmen gone in a single day. Some were vaporized mid-air. Some parachuted into flak bursts. And others drifted down in silence, watched by their friends until the parachutes became white dots swallowed by clouds. Those who did make it home brought back the same complaint. Head-on attacks are murdering us. The Luftwaffe had found the blind spot. See, the B-17's defensive guns were never designed for a frontal assault. The top and ball turrets couldn't dip or swivel far enough forward. The cheek guns in the nose were offset, limited arc. The one thing the fortress couldn't do was shoot straight ahead. Pilots begged for new mounts. Crews tried chaining spare guns to the nose glass. Some taped their triggers to the yokes. Headquarters told them to maintain discipline. No unauthorized modifications, no firing through the airframe. You'll just kill yourselves before the Germans do. But the Germans were doing it faster. 2 men's names hung in the squadron mess hall like ghosts. Sergeant Joe Lang, top turret gunner. Last words over the radio: "They're coming, 12 high!" Then static. His fortress found later in a smoking crater near Kassel. Lieutenant Robert Keyes, co-pilot on Misbehavior. 2 engines shredded by 20mm shells. Witnesses said they saw him trying to glide home before the plane broke apart at 8,000 feet. What the crews remembered most wasn't the sight. It was the smell. The stink of burning fuel and hydraulic fluid, thick enough to taste. The silence when the last radio cut out. They flew again the next morning anyway, because orders didn't stop, and neither did the dying. Hank Doyle wasn't anyone special. 23 years old, waist gunner, small-town Kentucky kid who could fix anything with a wrench and wire. He wasn't the loud one in the barracks, or the joker. He was the kind who stayed late after every mission, cleaning the guns until his hands bled because he didn't trust anyone else to do it right. They called him Hillbilly Hank. He called himself Lucky, because luck was all that stood between you and a White Cross in Belgium. After Schweinfurt, his best friend, tail gunner Eddie Moss, never came back. The Germans hit them head-on that day. Doyle saw the burst, saw the tail vanish in fire. There was nothing left to bury. That night, in the cold mess hall, Doyle sat with a piece of bread and a pencil stub, sketching angles on her napkin. The math wasn't complicated, just geometry. If the right side gun pivoted 3 degrees more, he could rake the space between the starboard engine nacelles, a clean line through open air before the bullet path met the edge of the wing. He'd heard the warnings, fuel tanks, control cables, catastrophic risk, but he'd also heard Eddie's last radio scream. He pinned the napkin to the wall over his cot. Next to it, a line he scribbled in pencil. If the brass won't fix the angle, maybe I will. For the next week, Doyle stayed late under the hangar lights. He learned how far he could bend the mount before the bolts cracked. He fired a few rounds into the frozen mud just to test the travel. The smell of cordite filled the air. A mechanic saw him one night and shouted, "You'll get court-martialed for that!" Doyle didn't look up. Better that than watching another crew burn. He wasn't thinking about rebellion. He was thinking about Eddie, about the faces that vanished from the bunks each week. In war, you stop caring what's allowed. You start caring what works. The morning of January 9th, 1944, East Anglia airfield still half frozen, the sun just a smear of orange above the hangars. Hank Doyle crouches under the belly of his fortress, breath fogging in the air, flashlight wedged between his teeth. His fingers are raw, cracked from cold and oil. The metal burns to the touch. He loosens the traverse stop on the right side gun mount. 1, 2 turns of the wrench. The screw slips and slices his knuckle. Blood beads dark against the aluminum. The sound around him is mechanical life. Air compressors sighing, engines coughing awake, men shouting over wind. It smells of cordite, grease, and coffee gone cold hours ago. Doyle's stomach knots. He's not supposed to be doing this. Regulations are clear. Any unauthorized change to weapon mounts is punishable by court-martial. But he also knows those rules were written back in Washington by men who'd never seen tracer lines curving toward their face. He whispers to himself, 3 degrees more, just 3. He tightens the bolt again, tests the sweep. The barrels now point through the wing arc, just skimming the edge of the fuel cell. One mistake, and the next trigger pull could turn the fortress into a fireball. He wipes his hands on his flight suit and looks around the empty tarmac. Only the crew chief's dog is watching. He fires a short burst into the fog. The recoil thunders through his arms, the sound echoing off the hangars. Hot casings rain onto his boots. A neat row of holes appears across an old snowdrift, perfectly lined. "Holy hell," he mutters. "The angle works." That night, he sits alone in the dim light of the Nissen hut, sketching again. New numbers, new angles. His crew thinks he's crazy. One of them, Sergeant Mendez, tells him, "If the brass finds out, you're done." Doyle shrugs. "If they don't, we're all done anyway." He sleeps 3 hours, Then the next mission comes. January 11th, 1944. Target, Bremen. The fortress engines roar to life, 4 Wright cyclones shaking frost from the wings. The crew moves like ghosts, faces hidden behind oxygen masks, goggles fogging. They climb to altitude, join formation, and turn east. Below them, Germany stretches like a patchwork of snow and smoke. Inside Lucky Lady 2, Doyle checks his modified mount one more time. The bolt wobbles slightly. He feels it through his glove. "Don't fail me now," he whispers. 2 hours in, contrails, black dots ahead, FW-190s and BF-109s climbing fast, 10 o'clock high. The intercom crackles. "Here they come! Head on!" Everyone braces. Pilot, "Keep it tight. Hold your line." Ball gunner, "I got tracers crossing. They're splitting." Doyle's heart slams in his chest. The Luftwaffe fighters streak forward in formation, cannon shells flashing. The first burst hits the lead fortress above them, wing shears off, spirals away in smoke. Then they're on Lucky Lady 2. 190 dives right at them, front on, dead center of the nose. The bombardier fires first. His twin 30s spark against armored glass but do nothing. Doyle tracks the fighter through his sight. The angle's wrong again. The bastard's too low. He forces the handles right, past the limit. Metal groans. The wing edge fills his view. He hesitates half a heartbeat, then squeezes the triggers. The barrels rip to life, 500 rounds a minute. Tracer lines streak through the wing, a red curtain slicing the sky. For a moment, the entire starboard side glows like molten glass. The Focke-Wulf flies straight into it. 2 hits, then 3. The engine explodes, flame, debris, a cloud of burning oil that passes so close they feel the heat through the fuselage. "Got him!" Doyle screams into the mic. The waist gunner laughs like a madman. The co-pilot yells, "You're burning your own damn wing!" But the wing holds. Smoke, yes, but no fire. Another fighter comes in high left. Doyle pivots again, same insane angle, same roar of recoil. This one peels off, trailing smoke, dives away. The attack breaks apart. Luftwaffe pilots, seeing the crossfire from the fortress's own wings, scatter in confusion. The tight, deadly approach that had worked for months suddenly isn't safe anymore. The rest of the formation makes it through the run. Bombs drop. Target hit. When Lucky Lady 2 lands that afternoon, the ground crew crowds around. They count over 200 bullet holes in the fuselage, 10 of them in the right wing. Burned, but not ruptured. The mechanic swears, "You shot your own damn plane." Doyle grins, eyes red from cold and adrenaline. "And brought it back, didn't I?" That night, word spreads through the barracks. A waist gunner in the 303rd hit 2 Focke-Wulfs by shooting through his own airplane. Some think it's a myth. Others think he's insane. But the next morning, a crew from another squadron is spotted in the hangar loosening their own traverse stops. By the end of the week, 3 more bombers have tried it. One gunner calls it the Doyle angle. No one writes it down in reports. No one asks permission. It's whispered in mess lines and engine bays, passed on like a superstition. You want to live through a frontal run? Fire through the wing. Soon the airfield nights are alive with the sound of testing, short bursts into snowbanks, quick fixes with wrenches, nervous laughter. Some of the new guys are terrified. Others are desperate. Doyle watches it happen quietly. He doesn't brag. He doesn't have to. The next time they fly, he sees it himself. Another fortress a few miles off his right wing, tracers cutting across its own silhouette. For the first time in months, the Luftwaffe breaks off early. That small change, the angle of a mount, the courage to break a rule, has just rewritten the survival odds for thousands of men. And the man who did it will never even sign his name to the act. The change spreads like static across the frozen airfields of East Anglia. At first, it's just whispers. Crews in the chow line muttering about that guy from the 303rd who shot through his own wing. Mechanics pretending not to notice new scorch marks on aircraft they service. Then, it's everywhere. Late-night hangars echo with bursts of gunfire as airmen test their angles, adjusting by flashlight and gut instinct. Some carve extra room into their mounts using bayonets as makeshift files. Others just kick the lock and pray. By February, the Luftwaffe notices something's wrong. Their top-scoring ace, Oberleutnant Hans Wiese, writes in his journal that the American boxes have found a way to aim forward without our seeing it. The crossfire is impossible to enter. Intercepted radio traffic backs it up. New defensive pattern, impossible to close frontal. Within weeks, the kill ratios start to flip. Before, every head-on pass guaranteed a fortress kill. Now, it's suicide. In March, bomber losses to frontal attacks drop by almost half. By April, head-on tactics are nearly abandoned altogether. And still, there's no order on paper, no official fix, no memo from high command. Just a ripple of defiance passed from one cold hand to another. Crews start modifying mounts before missions without even thinking twice. Engineers notice the damage reports shrinking. A few squadrons quietly build new firing arcs into their replacement parts. By summer, the next batch of Boeing's production bombers includes revised turret traverse tolerances. No one in Seattle knows the name of the man who started it. But every airman who flies one of those new fortresses owes his life to a mechanic's wrench and one Kentucky gunner's stubborn math. From the Luftwaffe's perspective, the sky has turned treacherous. Their old tactic, frontal diving run at 12 o'clock, had been their trump card. Now the B-17s seem to spit fire from impossible angles. Tracers intersecting midair, glowing red webs in the clouds. Pilots talk about being caught in the cross, a phantom firing zone that seems to follow them in. Some swear they see gunners aiming through their own planes, and it shakes them. They begin breaking formation earlier, striking from the sides again, but now the Mustangs and Thunderbolts are escorting deep into Germany. The noose tightens. The math of the air war changes. The average life expectancy of a bomber crew stretches from 12 missions to 20, then to 25, the number that earns a ticket home. The Doyle angle becomes invisible doctrine, a rumor turned instinct. No brass band, no commendation, just fewer funerals. When the war ends in 45, Doyle comes home to Kentucky. He doesn't talk much about what he did. People ask if he saw combat. He says, enough. He works at a repair shop, fixes tractors, marries a girl from the post office. Every now and then he looks up when a plane passes overhead and watches it until it disappears. In his attic, tucked in a box with yellowed letters and an old A2 jacket, there's a napkin, the same one he'd drawn on that night after Schweinfurt. Faded pencil lines show the arc of a bullet path crossing a B-17 wing. Below it, a line in handwriting, half erased. If the brass won't fix the angle, maybe I will. He never asked for credit, never thought of it as invention. It was survival. In 1953, a local reporter interviews him for a Memorial Day story. He mentions the wing trick offhand, laughs, says he just got lucky. The quote runs once in the back of a Sunday paper, never picked up again. Meanwhile, Boeing historians later write that adjusted firing traverse improved frontal defense. They don't mention whose wrench did it first. 80 years later, his name doesn't appear in any military archive. No citation, no photograph on a wall. But if you look closely at those old combat reels, the grainy footage of B-17s holding formation, you can see it. tracers crossing the edges of the wings, bright and clean, right through the aluminum. The moment the war's deadliest blind spot disappeared. And maybe somewhere, Doyle's spirit is sitting on that freezing tarmac again, grease on his hands, the sound of distant engines rolling over the horizon. Because that's what courage looked like in that war. Not medals, not speeches. Just one man, in the dark, deciding he'd had enough of watching his friends die. After every mission, crews gathered on the runway, sometimes to celebrate, sometimes to count empty bunks. Men who'd flown the same route, faced the same storm of fire, always knew when something had shifted. And when they saw those tracers cutting through the wings for the first time, they knew. The war had changed. Because one of their own refused to obey a rule that didn't make sense anymore. Years later, when the last B-17s were flown to museums, some of those airframes still had the scars. Small burn marks along the starboard wing roots where gunners had fired too close. Mechanics who restored them noticed and wondered why, but the veterans who visited just smiled and said nothing. It wasn't something you explained. It was something you felt. The hum of engines under your boots, the cold air biting your face, the split-second choice between living by the book or living at all. That's the legacy Hank Doyle left behind. 1,000 men alive because one man ignored a page in a manual. He died in 1987, never telling the full story. At his funeral, the local VFW folded a flag and said the usual words. But one of his old crewmates, white hair, trembling hands, placed a single wrench on top of the casket. Not flowers, a wrench. Because that's what he used to save them. So the next time you see one of those gray fortresses sitting quiet in a museum, look at the wings. Those burn marks aren't mistakes. They're fingerprints of men who refused to die by the rules. And somewhere between the silence of those hangars and the static of old gun camera film, their story still hums, low and steady, like an engine that never quite shuts off. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed so these names don't disappear.